Recently, Donald Trump has expressed his views on this whole bathroom controversy. That he has no problem with this whole liberal agenda and the whole thing that's going on with the bathrooms. Do you not see this as a disaster waiting to happen? I mean, you know how many wackos are going to take advantage of this? How many rapes are going to happen? I don't understand people who go to church and call themselves Christians would want to support Donald Trump. Not a real Christian would not support Trump, who says he's pro-choice, he never repented. I mean, the list goes on. No, over Ted Cruz, a real Christian who's against Planned Parenthood and all that stuff. No, you know what? That is sickening to me. That people who go to church would prefer Trump over Ted Cruz. You know what? Before you vote, read James 4:17. It says, "Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." Anyway, because this is like a real big thing going on right now in the media, it's being talked about a lot. Obviously, this stirs up conversation, and I thought that this would be a good time to get into some of the really popular arguments that homosexuals throw at Christians. The whole thing about, well, if you're going to say that this is a sin, then you're also going to have to obey all the laws of the Old Testament, you know, that arguments like that. So I wrote this up the other day. I'm going to just pretty much read what I typed this up the other day. I'm going to pretty much read what I typed up. People who say Christians are hypocrites for not following all the laws in the Old Testament don't take the whole Bible into account. Because if they did, they would know that book of Hebrews, teaches that the Old Covenant has been done away with, and there are certain laws that don't have to be followed anymore, like laws for theocracy or ceremonial laws that were just for priests, or laws about not eating certain foods because of Mark 7:19. So if you have homosexuals who say to you, why don't you follow all the laws in the Bible and not eat shellfish and not wear mixed fabrics? And why don't you sell your daughter into slavery? Or why do you shave your beard? You could tell them Jesus declared all foods clean in Mark chapter 7, verse 19. Laws about not wearing mixed cloth or fabric thing. The ESV study notes say ceremonial holiness requires that things stay in their proper sphere, just as Israel must observe their separation of the nations. There aren't any laws or any mention in the New Testament about wearing mixed fabrics or not shaving your beard. There are commands about dressing modest, and it doesn't call wearing mixed cloth an abomination. There were laws for a theocracy and laws for priests and ceremonial laws that no longer apply because we're under a new covenant. Look, read the book of Hebrews. But moral laws applied even to people outside the Old Covenant. That was universal. Leviticus 18 gives a list of moral sins, including homosexuality, verse 22. And in verse 24 to 25, God says, "Do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these things the nations which I am casting out before you have become defiled. For the land has become defiled, therefore I have brought its punishment upon it. So the land has spewed out its inhabitants." Now, there aren't any laws there about shaving or shellfish, the people outside the Old Covenant. So it was the moral laws that went beyond the Old Covenant. As far as slavery in the ancient world, that's how some people would be able to be provided with food, clothing, and marriage. Exodus 21:10. It was forbidden to sell the women to a foreign people. She was to be sold to people who had God's laws imposed on them. Verse 8, but since we live in a different cultural and historical context and covenant, those slavery laws don't apply anymore. Things must be understood in context. In Matthew 5:18, this is something we might use. Jesus said, for truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all this is accomplished. Theologian and archaeologist Dr. Randall Price comments on this verse and says, these words refer to the fulfillment of all that the Old Testament law and prophets, verse 17, predicted, meaning prophecy. Not that all the Old Testament laws are still in effect. Obviously, Jesus is the final sacrifice for sins, so animals no longer have to be sacrificed. Now, as far as some of those who attack God's morality should remember the law of selling your daughter into slavery in Exodus 21:7 was not in any moral way. Leviticus 19:29 says, do not prostitute your daughter to cause her to be a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land become full of wickedness. Slavery back then was done in a way for people to survive and have food and clothing, and the selling of a daughter was done within the context of marriage. Read all of the chapter of Exodus, chapter 21. People who try to apply every old covenant law for now are making category errors, and when they try to deny moral sins that are spoken of in both testaments, they're trying to divorce Jesus from the Old Testament and ignoring scriptures in the New. For instance, Matthew chapter 19, verses 4 to 6, Jesus said that marriage is one man, one woman. Okay. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 to 10, it speaks against homosexuality. Romans 1 in the New Testament strongly speaks against homosexuality. These are just some objections that I noticed that a lot of homosexuals have been throwing at Christians, so I want to throw some of that out there. One more. For people who say God commanded women to marry their rapist. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 28 to 29 says, if a man finds a girl who is a virgin, who is not engaged, and seizes her and lies with her, and they are discovered, then the man who lay with her shall give to the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall become his wife, because he has violated her. He cannot divorce her all his days. Now, the Reformation Study Bible says, women depended on their marriage relationship for protection and status in ancient Near Eastern society, and the law provides important protections for women. The ESV Study Notes says, the law seeks to protect the woman who is less likely to be married because she has been violated. Now, with this, God's laws would be imposed on the man to not mistreat the wife. The consequences for raping a woman engaged to be married was stoning, Deuteronomy 22, verse 25. If the woman was not engaged, the rapist was spared for the sake of the woman's security. And again, this was only under the Old Covenant. So Christians, we have to be ready to give an answer These are the popular things that are being used now, popular objections. And we should not be ashamed of God's word. No. It says in Psalm 119, verses 162, it says, I rejoice at your word as one who finds great treasure. The real Christian is not going to be ashamed of that, of God's word. And we have to be ready to give an answer. Because, like I said, this is the kind of stuff, this and more, is being used a lot. It's all over social media, whatever. So, hope this was helpful to someone. Okay.